While physics is more about problem solving than the actual mathematics, obviously we still need to use the math. Algebra is one of the things that can trip you up, so we want to make sure you can handle some of our standard algebra routines. I'm sure you remember PEMDAS. You were introduced to it back in the algebra class, and we're going to talk about that a little bit here. Parentheses. Anything with parentheses around it, like 3 plus 4, that goes before anything outside of it. So parentheses are our first priority. Exponents. Anything raised to a power. Like here we have 4 raised to the third power. You would do this after you've established your parentheses first. Multiply. Multiplying numbers. Not as high a priority as exponents or parentheses, but with divide, these two are next in line. We're representing multiplication, sometimes with an X, sometimes just a dot between them. It'll vary by problem. Divide has the same priority as multiply. Rarely will you see this division symbol in any of our formulas in physics. Typically, you'll have some number or variable divided by another, occasionally with a slash between. Adding, along with later subtracting, have the lowest priority. Addition, fairly straightforward with the plus sign, not much variety there. And of course, finally, subtraction. Subtraction, no surprises, has the same priority as addition, but you'll have to pay a lot more attention to it here than perhaps you have in the past. Negative numbers have a lot more meaning in physics than you might expect. And of course, if you're trying to remember PEMDAS, we all know it's people eat many donuts and Slurpees. Do you really eat a Slurpee? Originally, this assignment was done a few years ago as a quiz. We've backed away from making it a quiz, did it for a worksheet for a while, then as a lecture, and now we're trying to flip the classroom. And we'll do it here as this video instead. For this problem, we want to solve for k. We want to isolate that k and get it alone. So first we'll play with the terms that aren't with the k. For example, the st. We'll move that to the other side. So move it to the other side. When we do so, we end up making it negative. So we end up with a minus st over here, and the st goes away on this side. You might be more familiar with doing it this way. We have m minus the st equals your st minus the st plus your 3k. The st's cancel here, and you have that negative st on the other side, whichever method works for you. So now with our m minus st equals 3k, now to get that k alone, we'll divide by 3. Notice we did not divide by the 3 first. Since it's with the k, save that step for last. Divide both sides by 3. And the 3's on the right will cancel. And you essentially have k equals mist all over 3. You can separate that out and make it m over 3 minus st over 3 equals k, but it's truly not necessary. When we grade tests and quizzes, we're looking for particular steps. That's where that showing the work comes in. So here you see there was 1 point for getting to the point of the m minus st equals 3k. That st was subtracted from both sides. Another point was awarded for dividing both sides by 3. The last point is typically for the final answer. This problem is just a little bit trickier. Here we want to solve for d. Again, we want to get that d by itself. So we'll play with that last. Play with the other terms first. You've got that a squared, t squared. That can easily be moved over to the other side. Again, when you move it to the other side, it does become negative. So minus a squared, t squared. Don't forget that r squared is still over there as a positive value. That goes away. So we have our r squared minus a squared t squared equals d squared. We want to solve for d, not d squared, so we do need to take the square root of both sides. Square root of the left, square root of the right. And we have square root of r squared minus the a squared t squared equals your d. You are done at this point. Do not go any further. You might have thought, of course you wouldn't go any further. You're done. However, occasionally people will make the mistake of thinking they can do a little bit more. Again, here's that point breakout. 1 point for the initial moving over that a squared t squared. Another point for making it all look right at that point. Last point, take the square root of both sides. But you want to stop there. If another step is taken, sometimes people go a little further, trying to take another square root on that right side, and thinking that the square root of r squared minus a squared t squared is just r minus at. That is not the case. Try it sometime with actual numbers. Plug numbers into r, a, t, etc., and you'll find the numbers don't work out. So while this particular equation might look like we're just starting to get silly and putting weird variables together for no real reason, some of the algebra formulas that we have in physics do get a little complicated. So this is certainly something you could come across, at least in some similar form. So when I get that t by itself, or at least solve for t, well, fastest, easiest way would be to cross multiply. When you look at the value on the left, that e is actually e over 1. So you actually have fractions on both sides. Cross multiplying allows you to take the numerator on one side, denominator on the other side, and have them just trade places. So you fairly quickly get 3t squared equals your 2w squared over e. You could do it as separate steps. Multiply both sides by 3t squared, and you get e 3t squared. And then divide both sides by e. This is just doing it more quickly in one single step. At this point, since we want to solve for t, we want to get that 3 away from it. Don't do the square root yet. You want to get rid of the 3. So divide both sides by 3. 3 goes over the other side to the denominator. So t squared equals your 2w squared over 3e. Again, we want t by itself. Square root of both sides. And on the left, you get your t. Now on the right, you can pull out that w squared, since everything there is being multiplied and divided. It's not really necessary, but if you do, that comes out. And now you've got your 2 over 3e inside the square root sign. At that point, you stop and you're done. Here's how we would do a point breakout for that. Again, notice those steps where you are getting the 3t squared off to the left. Here it wasn't done as cross multiplication, it was done as 2 separate steps. Multiplied that over, divided by the e to get the e back to the other side, and then the square root taken. This is certainly the trickiest of the bunch, and maybe we are pushing the level of calculations we see in the class just a little bit. But work out with the hard stuff. Get your muscles toned up. Then the easier stuff is just that, easier. Since we want that h by itself, we really want it in a numerator. So again, we can do that cross multiplication. Or, rather than cross multiplication, you could just flip both sides. Since that p over 1 on the left-hand side, flip the left side, flip the right side. That's also a legitimate solution. So I'm going to go ahead and do it that way instead. So we got 1 over p on the left equals our 2t plus our 3h squared. All of that over 2m squared. Again, cross multiplication could have been used instead. Now we want to get the information on the right a little more isolated. Get rid of that denominator. You can't subtract out the 3h squared. You can't subtract out the 2t. That is a plus there, sorry. So we're going to go ahead and multiply both sides by 2m squared. You get your 2m squared over p. And over on the right, simplifies down to your 2t plus your 3h squared. Notice how I make my t's with that little curl at the bottom. It's called a serif. The reason I do that is that I want my t's and plus signs to look the same. Obviously my handwriting's not that good in the first place. If your t's and pluses look too much alike, you can make mistakes with it, and it could also be harder for your teacher to grade. So try and make them look somewhat different. Now to get that h alone, we don't want to divide by 3 just yet. Well, we could. That just makes things much more complicated. Let's get rid of that 2t first. Put that over to the left. So divide both sides by 2t, which essentially moves the 2t over to the other side and makes it negative. So 2m squared over p minus 2t equals 3h squared. At this point, we'll divide both sides by 3, and we'll take the square root. I'm running out of room on this page, so we'll just look at the answer on the next page. So more points on this one since it was more complex. Again, we brought that 2t plus 3h squared, multiplied, put it over on the left-hand side. Okay, so I didn't do the reciprocals in this case. This answer key has it as more of a cross-multiplication type problem. And we then, to solve for the h, did it much more complicated manner. Because now you've got to factor out the p and everything else. Divide by the p. P comes over the other side. Each step worth a point. Follow the steps through. Cross multiplication, usually the better method. Usually it's faster. We want you to be able to do these kind of problems, find your solutions, and get the algebra right. If you struggle with some of the algebra, get help. Math Help Center will help you. We'll help you. Final steps for this problem, take the square root, and there's various factoring that can be done. You don't need to spend too much time on that information under the square root sign. Obviously, you may not simplify your problem as much as we did, or you might simplify it more in our answer key. Don't worry about it. We'll take a look at your numbers, we'll analyze them, and we'll make sure that they're correct on quizzes and tests. If you want to double check your work, and you have a solution key and you look at it and you're not sure your algebra is the same, simple. Plug in some numbers for your solution, plug in those same numbers to their solution, come up with a numeric answer. If the numbers work out, then you did just fine. Check your work. Don't rely on your first guess. Your first guess is usually right. But if you can double check it with numbers, it's certainly worth your time. Again, get help with the algebra if you need it. Math Help Center, your teachers, we want you guys to do great. Work with us, we'll work with you. We'll get through this year and it'll be awesome.